Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Researching House and Property Records in the New South Wales State Archives Collection. My name is Emily Hanna and I will be presenting this webinar today. So when researching your house and property using our New South Wales State Archives Collection, you need to start by doing your homework first. So think about things like, are you looking for records of a house that was recently built? If that was the case, you need to start with your local council. If you're looking at an older house, start with the information that you know. So do you know who owned the property at any stage? Do you know the address? And sometimes you might know one or the other. And do you have any other information that could help? So things like Torrens title number, the parish, county and portion number, a Crown plan number could help you, and also a deposited plan or lot number, so a DP number. And the other thing to think about when you're researching house and property is that street numbers and street names can change over time. When thinking about council records, there are records created such as building and development applications. And many of you, if you've done renovations or built a house, you would have had to have submitted some of these applications in the course of doing the work to your property. Now, building applications and development applications are not transferred into the New South Wales State Archives Collection, so we don't keep those records. They're kept with the local councils and they mostly date from around about the 1920s and onwards. They're things, the BAs and the DAs can include written design specifications, maps and plans relating to proposed property developments, including demolitions. And you'll also find applications for buildings or garages or fences and alterations and additions to structures. Councils also created rate and valuation books, and some councils have transferred some of these books to the State Archives Collection. So we'll have a look at what they look like later, but you can find out if we've got those through our catalogue collection search. And also through your local council, don't forget your local studies collection, usually found in the local library. So there can be photographs and drawings, oral histories and other kinds of histories of the area that might also draw on what's happened or how and when your property was built. So thinking about where did an ancestor live that you're researching, or who else might have lived in the property that you're researching, sources such as electoral rolls and directories like the Sands Directory can be very useful. Now, electoral rolls between 1903 and 1980 have been digitised on the Ancestry and the Find My Past websites. These are subscriber websites, but many public libraries and indeed in our own reading room, we provide free access to both of these websites. The Sands Directory, which is a Sydney product, although they do contain some pastoral information from time to time. The Sands Directory has been digitised by the City of Sydney Council Archives, so you can check that on the City of Sydney Council website. And there's also, of course, Trove. So the newspapers of the day have been digitised by the National Library of Australia, and the National Library's also digitised New South Wales Government Gazettes, and both of those can be useful when researching house and property records. And then, of course, we'll think about the Archives Collection. Now, firstly, just looking at an example, pardon me, of an electoral roll. This is an electoral roll for the area of Burwood, which is a suburb of Sydney in New South Wales. So this is arranged alphabetically by surname, and you can see that it gives you the street name and the suburb of where each person lived, as well as their occupation. So at the top there, we've got George Noble Hanna, Kate Hanna, living in Seymour Street, Enfield. Don't know the number of where they lived, but at least we know their address now. Then if I think about the Sands Directory, which is arranged by address, I can look up Seymour Street, Enfield, and see who lived in Seymour Street, Enfield, and what numbers the people lived at. So from the Sands Directory, I can now see that George Hanna lived at 26 Seymour Street, Enfield. So that gives me the street name, the street number, and also the name of the person who lived there. And this is a 1923 example. Now, thinking about the State Archives website and the State Archives Collection, which is where we're moving to now, I just wanted to start with our homepage for those of you that may not be that familiar with it. So on the home page, you can see we've got the picture of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and there's 3 dark boxes on the Harbour Bridge picture there. The third one down is called Quick Links. And there you'll see a link to our online indexes, which is where people have looked for names in records and they've typed those names up into various indexes. We've got our Research A to Z, which is a list of topics that are quite useful for researching in the New South Wales Archives collection, so things like death, bankruptcy, court records and so on. One of those topics is, of course, H for house records, and directly under that we've got our link to our webinars. So just as a side stroke, if you want to look at some of our other webinars, go to our webinars link on that homepage and it will take you to the upcoming ones you can register for and our webinar library where you can view previous webinars. And this one will go up later today or tomorrow, depending on availability, and then you can view this one back as well. So looking at Research A to Z there, we can click on that and then that will take us to our list of research topics. And you can see they're just arranged alphabetically. If I click on H, I will go to House and Property Guide, and there we've pulled together a range of sources that relate to researching your house and property. We'll give you a brief description of each kind of record, some information about how to use them and why they might be useful for researching your house and property. So these are the kinds of records I'll be looking at today to show you examples of how they can help you. Things like parish maps, primary application, valuer generals records, so valuation rolls and those sorts of things. The Metropolitan Water, Sewerage and Drainage Board in Sydney created some plans of Sydney and its suburbs, and they're quite good because they show you footprints of houses on properties, and we'll look at some examples of those today as well. So researching house and property records using the State Archives Collection, these are the kinds of records we're going to look at today. We're going to look at deceased estate files and probate packets. And some people here today might be quite familiar with those records and others may not, but I'll be showing you how they can be useful for researching property records. We're going to look at valuation records and the information that can tell you. We'll look at primary applications. We'll look at maps and plans. We'll look at records of the Lands Department and the Surveyor General, and then we'll look at some government property records and photographs at the end of the webinar. So the first records we're going to talk about are deceased estate files. So these are a favourite of many of our readers, but also many of the staff. Now, these were records that were created to calculate the death duty owing on an estate. And because of that, the valuers would itemize or list everything a person owned at the time of their death and work out how much everything was worth. So each thing individually, so they could come up with a total value of the estate. So everything's listed: the knives, the forks, the cutlery, the lino, the curtains, the furniture, the real estate, the personal property, the shares, everything. And so they can give you quite an insight into both what a person owned at the time of their death, but also how they furnished their houses and the quality of the furnishings therein. So fascinating, fascinating records. And the deceased estate files will also tell you who the heirs of the estate were and what their relationship to the deceased was. So were they the wife, the husband, the children, the nephews, the friends, who they were. So where you can find the files listed, and they're listed by name, so you know the name of the deceased, then you can go and find out if there's a deceased estate file for them. Between 1880 and the mid-1930s, you can check our website, online indexes, D for deceased estate files, and search the name of the person there. With our indexes, particularly the very early times, they often listed people as B. Smith or R. Hannah. So they may not actually list the first name in full. It might just be the first initial and the surname. Does give you the date of death, does also give you the locality. So often from that information you can work out if it's your person or if it's connected to the family or if it's likely to be not one you're searching for. So they're very useful. And then from 1923 to 1958, the later indexes, which are available on microfilm in our reading room, have also been copied onto the Ancestry website. So you can go to Ancestry, just type in the name and possibly the year of the death, and it will come up with all the possible links to those people. With the Ancestry indexes, it's a card. You write down the number on the top right-hand corner. That's the deceased estate file number. Then the files are held at our Western Sydney Record Centre. So you come to the reading room or you can order copies via our copy service and we'll copy those and post them to you, or you view them in the reading room. So I can't show you the entire file, unfortunately, but I can show you some examples of some of the most useful documents in a deceased estate file. So this first document we're looking at today is a certificate of valuation. And this is for our George Noble Hannah. This is the same person we looked at in the electoral rolls in the Sands directory. So this is a bit later. This is 1948 when he had passed away. And this tells us that he owned the house at Croydon Park, so still owned it after all these years. It's 26 Seymour Street still. We've got the lot and the section and the DP numbers there. We've got the date that the house was valued. We have the unimproved value, so the value of the land, and the improved value. So that would be the value of the land plus the house and any structure that was on that land. And we can tell you that he had a 5-room brick cottage with kitchen, offices. It had a slate and iron roof, fibro garage, galvanised iron roof on the garage, I guess, and a brick fence. So it tells us a bit about his house, it tells us where it was, and it tells us some of those land numbers that we need to continue researching that property. Here we can see an extract from the valuation list with slightly different improved and unimproved values there. That was from August 1948. Tells us information there. And then this next piece of paper here contains some very useful information indeed. It's got the certificate of title number. So it tells us a volume and a folio number. It also tells us he had a second property in Booker Bay, and it gives us the volume and the folio number for that. So if you see a volume, a certificate of title, volume and folio number, write it down because they are important, and I'll show you why in a little while. So critical information there, volume and folio number. And this other document here is just quite interesting. This is the statutory declaration of Kate, who was his wife. So she's declared she's the executrix of his will. He was a railway employee, so you could go off and research railway employee records to find out how long he worked for the railways and what his job was and that sort of thing. Interesting that she states he had no jewellery, no personal effects of any saleable value, and owned no furniture. All the furniture was owned by Kate and had been purchased from time to time by her out of her own money. So that meant that they didn't have to pay death duties on the jewellery, any personal effects or any furniture. So you do see documents like that from time to time as well. Now, the next records we're going to talk about are the probate packets. Now, probate packets are documents produced by the Supreme Court of New South Wales. We at State Archives hold probate packets from 1817 to 1976. Then we also hold some from 1989. If we don't hold the packets, so if they're later than 1976, except for 1989, we refer you back to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has not transferred those later probate packets to us, but we do hold pretty much everything from 1817 to 1976. Now, the probate packet was more to do with the Supreme Court saying that the will was the valid and legal last will of that deceased person, that the executor was the legal person able to process the probate of that estate, and to make sure that probate was granted so that the goods in the estate could be transferred to the heirs. So it's slightly different to the deceased estate files, but the probate packets can contain some of those same valuation documents that you'd see in a deceased estate file. So remembering deceased estate files stop in 1958, for dates after 1958, the probate packets are really important because that's where you get your valuation information. Probate packets can also have caveats, death certificates, affidavits of death, and executor statements, those sorts of things. So very useful documents indeed. Now, looking for a probate packet, I'd go back to our website and I'd go to our catalogue collection search. So again, Sydney Harbour Bridge picture. Under that is a big search box with the words Kate Hannah in it right now, and then on the right-hand side of that, you've got the option to search the collection, and if you clicked on the down arrow, you could change that to search the website. So we want to search the collection, we want to search the catalogue, so we keep it at collection, and then I just click on the, once I've inserted the name Kate Hannah, I then click on the red looking glass, the search button there, to then find out what I might have to do with Kate Hannah in the collection. And lo and behold, we hold a probate packet for Kate Hannah, who dies in 1959. So yay! And we can go and have a look at that probate packet. I've got some examples I've prepared earlier for you. And here we hold the Affidavit D, which is the affidavit that was submitted to the Stamp Duty's office, copy also put into the probate packet. So this affidavit is the key for researching your house and property. This tells us the value of the estate, tells us who Kate was, where she lived, and who her executors were. So it was the sons, it was Frederick George, Harold Noble, and Allen Hannah, and helpfully tells us all the addresses of all of the sons, which is very good, and tells us that she was 73 when she passed away. On the right-hand side of that screen there, you have a schedule which lists the property that Kate owned at the time of her death. So there's the furniture at her Seymour Street property, the furniture at her Booker Bay properties, and then going down the list there, she's got bank accounts and those sorts of things. Another document that's found in this probate packet, just to give you an idea of the valuation documents that can be found there, this is actually a list of the household effects that were in Seymour Street and the value of each one. So the piano, the easy chair, the dressing table, the lowboy, the wardrobe, all of those things, all valued down to the worn Axminster carpet and the seagrass music stand, and how much value they had each. And when you look at other people, so if they were quite wealthy and had lots of property, you might also see schedules of livestock and all the different kinds of things that landed people would have, or it might be quite brief if it's just a very low value property. So it just depends what the person owned at the time of their death. And you can see ones where they've gone through room by room and described all the furniture in every single room of the house. So they could be helpful too if you're just researching what was in a house at a particular time. The next record we're going to look at are the valuation records. So the Valuer General created valuation records throughout the years, and these were kept as cards between 1916 and 1927, and then valuation rolls, which is more like a book rather than an individual card. So the early cards are mainly for urban areas throughout New South Wales, so Sydney and country towns. The valuation rolls do cover most areas in New South Wales, and they're arranged by council area and then often by ward within that area. So it's fun, particularly as councils, as we know, boundaries can change, wards can change, council names can change as councils are amalgamated or separated. So you really have to be cluey as to where your council boundaries were at the time of your research. An example here is the valuation card for 26 Seymour Street, Enfield. it tells us again the same information that we knew before. So it's another way to approach your research for your house and property. If you knew where the property was but not who owned it, you could be looking at valuation records at particular times, and that would give you the information of who the owner was at particular times. So again, it gives us that same description, the brick cottage with the 5 rooms, the kitchen, the offices, the slate and iron roof, and the owner, George Noble Hanna, Seymour Street, Croydon. On the back, it's got the dates of the valuations. So these are quite early, 1920, 1922, 1925. So we know that the Hannas owned this as early as 1920, if not before. Still owned it in 1948, so we know they owned it for quite a long time. We also have the estate name, which is Araby Hills, which might be interesting if you wanted to extend your search to the history of the local area and when Araby Hills was first developed and those sorts of things. This is a valuation roll record, so this is later. You can see the dates on the left-hand side there. This one covers from 1950 to 1965. So up in the top left-hand corner, we've got George Hanna, Kate Hanna, then it goes to Frederick, Harold and Alan, and then it's transferred to Nancy and Raymond Bowden, and they continue to own that house right up to 1965. We've got the very useful volume and folio numbers there on the left-hand side in the middle. We've got volume 1962, folio 69. We remember that number. We've also got the DP 5412. We've got the estate number. We've got the street number. And we've got the valuations of the property between 1950 and 1965. And looking down at the description of the improvements there at the bottom, not a lot has changed. It's still a brick cottage with 5 rooms, kitchen, office with the slate and iron roof, although it looks like they did add the garage after the original valuation in 1920 and the fence. The next record that we're going to look at is the council and rate valuation books. So as I said before, some New South Wales councils have transferred rate and valuation books into our collection, and some councils have retained their own. So the way to find out is whether we hold those, whether they're held in the State Archives Collection, is to check our catalogue collection search. So I would start by searching for the name of the council and then checking what records we hold for that particular council, and then did we have any rate and valuation books for the dates that you're searching and possibly for the wards that you're searching, particularly for those Sydney council areas. Some of the rate and valuation books are held at Kingswood, which is our head office at Penrith, and some are held in regional archive centres around New South Wales. So regional archive centres hold records of local significance. They hold some state government archives, but also private papers and things from the regional area. And they're at places like Armidale in the University of New England. They're at Wagga at the Charles Sturt University. There's one at University of Newcastle and the Newcastle Library. There's also one at Broken Hill and other places around New South Wales as well. And as I said before, other books are still held by council. So your choices there really would be, is it still held by the council? Is it held in the State Archives Collection? Rate books tell you things like the payment of rates by the property owners. They'll identify the property and the person rated and include annual value of the property and the accounting details, so when they paid their rates, that kind of thing. And the valuation books really just identify the properties and the persons rated. Sadly, we didn't have an example from Enfield of a rate and valuation book, so I've just had to pick on or Google a Shire for this just to show you what a rate and valuation book looks like. So it's a one-line entry going across the page there, divided up into columns, and the column heading at the top telling you what each page, what each column was about. Now, at this point, I just want to talk about land title records. We want to talk about records held by Land Registry Services New South Wales, or for short, we call them LRS. Now, over the years, Land Registry Services and its predecessors, which was Land and Property Information, or LPI, and before that they were called the Land Titles Office, and before that the Registrar General's Office. So think about Land Titles Office if it helps you. They've digitised a lot of land titles records over the years, and they've published those in their database, if you like. It's called the Historical Land Records Viewer. We call it the HLRV. Now, they've published the Old Form Torrens title registers covering 1863 to 1963 and the indexes that go with. We'll talk about those in a second. They've published the Old System Grant Register and the indexes. We'll have a look at an example of one of those. They've also published parish, county and town and village maps and charting maps, and we'll look at those and what kind of information they can tell you. They've also put Crown plans into the HLRV, but the only places that you can look at Crown plans is in our reading room here at Kingswood. You can view Crown plans here at Kingswood, can't buy them or copy them from us. You order copies of those through Land Registry Services or through their information brokers. And they've also put other records up as well. But given I've got an hour, I can't talk about the HLRV for a long time. So just quickly looking at their website, I've just put their homepage up. So lrsnsw.com.au, homepage on their website, and I've just drawn some circles around some useful points here. So the red circles are to the portal login, the online portal. So that's where you go to look for things in the HLRV. That's the online portal. If you want to find out about what information, what records they've published and digitised, then the two links, research and find records, is where you need to go. So if you click on research, you will come up with a page like this, where you've got some information about historical research, and you can look at Crown land, you can look at what historical records they've put online, you can look at information about old system land titles and parish maps and see their searching guides. So it's a really useful thing to do, particularly before you go into looking at the HLRV, is just to read some of their resources to give you a bit of background about what kinds of records there are, how do you need to find them, what information do you need to have already. And you can see down the bottom of that historical research column there's another place to log into the HLRV, or you can use the portal login at the top of the screen, which I put the red circle on. So if I've done that, if I've clicked on either of those two things, I've gone to the portal login, you can see here this is the LRS database, or their place where online you go to search for their records. I've circled the link to the Historical Land Records Viewer. That's in the red there. So if I clicked on that red thing there, I'd go straight to the HLRV. And we're just going to check what information we need before we go there. So I'm going back to my records. I've got my title document, or my details with the certificate of title from George Noble Hannah's deceased estate file. I've got my volume and my folio number of my certificate of title. So I've reminded myself I've got that. Then I go back to the HLRV and I'm searching for volume and folio, so 1962-69. So we've seen that number before on a couple of different documents. We just saw it right now in the deceased estate file. So I put 1962 volume dash 69, which is the folio. And what it comes up with is, first thing is my volume and folio 1962-69. So I've drawn a big circle around that one there so you can see what it looks like. And then the little 2 there, if I clicked on that particular thing there, that's the link to look at the record. And then this is what comes up, the certificate of title. So you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, I've circled the register number and the volume and folio number, 196269. So that's what it is. That is the certificate of title, the Torrens certificate of title. And that tells me that George Noble Hanna purchased this property, this land, in 1909. It tells me the description of the land. It gives me a little plan of that land and how big it was and where it was on Seymour Street and all of that. The stamp right down the bottom there tells me that George Noble Hanna took out a mortgage for this land in 1910. Just before I change and show you the next page over, we're just going to go back up to the top there onto the left-hand side, which I've also circled, and we can see we've got an application number, 6728, we'll talk about that shortly, and then we've also got the prior title, 1192 volume, folio 226A. So if I wanted to go back and find out what happened before George Noble Hanna takes out this title in 1909, I can go back to the HLRV, put in 1192-226A, and it will show me the previous certificate of title. So write that number down. Now, before we move on, we're just going to look at the next page over. And what we see here is a page with a whole stack of stamps on it. And what the stamps show you is each person to whom the title was transferred. It will also tell us of any mortgages, and it will tell us of any caveats and things like that. So one of the stamps on here, which I do apologise, forgot to circle, shows that the title was transferred to Kate Hanna in December 1948. So that's when George dies, property goes to Kate, and then Kate dies in 1959. So another one of the stamps shows that the property was then transferred to Frederick George Hanna, Harold Noble Hanna in January 1960. And then in April 1960, there's another stamp saying that the property's been transferred to Nancy and Raymond Bowden, and so on and so forth. And then you'll find any later Torrens title, certificate of title numbers, later volume and folio numbers would be shown here as well. So very key document in researching house and property. Going back to the previous certificate of title, 1192-226A, we can see that this is Prosper Orlanes Williams. It's a bigger property that he's bought, and he's subdivided that land and then sold blocks off to various people. And I've just circled this time on the right-hand side there, the stamp that says that George Noble Hanna purchased one of those blocks of land. And then there's another page to this particular title which shows us the plan of the entire title covered by 1192-226A. So it shows the whole property and then divided down into the little, sorry, not divided, but the property as it was before it was divided. And then the next title back, it shows us in the left-hand corner at the top there, the number of application. So this is the primary application. Torrens title was introduced in New South Wales in 1863. So the way that they recorded who owned land before that is called old system title. And then from 1863 onwards, they've been converting land from old system title over to the Torrens title system. And to do that, each person who wanted to convert their land across would have to submit an application, which is called a primary application. The application was given a number. So Prosper Orlanes Williams had applied to have that land transferred from old system to Torrens title. His application number is 6728. So we write that number down as well. Now, back to State Archives. Primary applications. So as I just said to you, Torrens title was introduced in 1863. So before that, what they used to record who owned land was called old system. And so from Torrens title 1863 onwards, they've been converting freehold land from the old system of titling to the Torrens title system of titling. And people had to make an application, a primary application, to convert their land from old system to Torrens title. They had to submit supporting documents that showed the chain of title from the first land grant right to the time of application, and they had to fill out a form. So we have the form and we have the documents, and the documents are held in envelopes called primary application packets. So they can be quite amazing because they'll show you wills, and very occasionally you might get that first land grant document showing who it was and then who's had that land after that first grantee. So the things that we hold in the collection are the primary application forms, the documents relating to, and then we've got the packets. You can search these in our collection search by the primary application number if you have it, and we just saw how you could pick that up. You could search by the name of the person who submitted the application, but the kicker is you have to know who that was. You could also search by the volume and folio number that was used at the time that they gave that first certificate of title in the Torrens title system. Or you might just be searching for a name and come across a primary application. That's what they're about, is that person applying to get that land transferred from old system to Torrens title. So in this example, I've just used the 6728. I've searched for that number. I've come up with both the form, the 13012, and also the primary application packet, which you can see there tells me Prosper Orleans Williams, tells me where the land was, and it tells me the volume and the folio number of that first Torrens title. So hello, kind of everything's there. Now looking at this next screen, what we see here is just a copy of the form that Prosper would have submitted with his primary application. So it tells us the extent of the land on the front there, and then the second page that you can see is a schedule of the documents showing the chain of title over the years. Now this land was first owned by Simeon Lord. Simeon Lord received this as an 800-acre land grant in 1816. I can see that here on the front page of this document, and later on, should you want to go back and look at this again, you would see it on the very first land title there that they refer back to Simeon Lord and his 1816 land grant again. Now, I just want to show you back in the HLRV old system, and I'm not talking about old system very much, but just as a very quick example here, I can go back to the old system grant index. I know that Simeon Lord got this land grant in 1816, so I can go back to the indexes. They're arranged by time period, so 1810 to 1819 is my time period because 1816. L is my letter because of Lord. So I can look up to see if I can find anything about that 1816 land grant. And then I've found the entry here. So we've got Simeon Lord, Liberty Plains, which is where that Concord, Croydon area was. That's what they called it back in the day. 800 acres. And I've got here also the serial number and page number, 674. And that's the number that I use in the HLRV to find the old system land grant, which is what the document on the right-hand side is there. That's the original land grant record kept by the Registrar General's Office for that 1816 grant. So that's very nice. Okay, now we're going to move on to other kinds of records in the State Archives collection, and we're going to just sort of mention the HLRV, but we're really sort of thinking about what's in the State Archives collection. So we're looking at maps and plans and Lands Department Surveyor General's records of occupation and alienation of Crown lands. So for land records, generally look at the land records guides in Research A to Z on the website. So there's a range of different guides there. And we've also got some indexes. We've indexed some land records and they're available on our website as well in online indexes under L for land. Now here's just a quick look at the various options for lands guides in the research A to Z, so sold to settlement, Surveyor General's primary application, Land Grants Guide, House and Property Guide features there, Crown Lands Occupation. So there's a range of different guides about various aspects of land. It's not exhaustive. It's not all the land records we've got in the collection, but these are some of the main ones that we've come across and are helpful to people. So thinking about maps and plans, why would you bother to look at them? Well, maps will help you to locate the necessary information to track land title information, and they act as indexes to land titles and registration information. Another website that's useful, again, is the LRS, the Land Registry Services 6 Maps website. I'm going to show you an example of the WSDB detail sheets. We'll look at historical parish maps and we'll look at Crown plans. And don't forget that the local council or the State Library of New South Wales can also hold maps that we may not get because they might not be government maps, but they might be very useful if it's like a map advertising a new estate being released or something like that. So they can be useful sources of information too. Now, the first thing that we'll do is just look at the 6 Maps website very quickly. So this, again, you can find using that address that I just gave you on the previous page, or you can just do a Google search for 6 Maps. When you open it up, you can just do a search for the street name, which is what I've done here. So I've just put 26 Seymour Street, Croydon Park in, and then it comes up with the little flag and it shows me exactly where the land is. So that's kind of good. I kind of know where it is now, so I'm finding that very helpful. And then, you know, Google, we've got Google these days, so I just wanted to have a quick look at what the house looks like, and that's what the house looks like in a recent street map of Google, a street view of Google Maps. The next things I want to just show you are the detail sheets from the Water, Sewerage and Drainage Board for Sydney. These maps sort of cover 1874 to 1945, and they show Sydney and suburbs with the positions of buildings, tram lines, railways, sewer lines, gas lines, those sorts of things. So they're quite useful to show you where everything was in the early days. There's 3 sets. There's an early set from 1874 to 1915. There's a set held by the State Library that covers the 1880s and the 1890s. And then we've got what we call the detail sheets of 1904 to 1945, which is the example I'll be showing you today. So here's what they look like. Behind you see the full map, and if it wasn't for the 6 maps, it would have been hard for me to work out exactly where the land was without going there. But here I have then worked out where that land was, and I've been able to circle in the red where it is on this particular plan, and then I've done a blow up of the footprint of the house. So you can see there that it's quite useful. It's an early sort of view, if you like, of where the house was on the land and the various structures that were there. So that's a really nice sort of thing to have, and you can see that there's sort of little sewerage lines and things showing on the other properties in the street there. And we hold those for Sydney City and Sydney suburbs. The next thing that we'll do is have a look at the historical parish maps. Now, these are digitised on Land Registry Services HLRV. So you just need to look for the name of the parish and the name of the county. And sometimes you'll know this, sometimes you won't. If you don't know the name of the parish or the county, check the Geographical Names Board website. So if you know what the closest town was, you can put the name of the town into the GNB website and it will tell you the name of the parish and the county that place that you're searching for was in. So if you've got a smaller place or a village or whatever the place that you're searching was known as, try putting that in and see what comes up. Parish maps are fabulous because they index land titles and other kinds of land records. So it's really like your basic, it's like a picture index almost, if you like. So for freehold land, they'll show the name of the first person to own the land, so that first grantee. So Simeon Lord for our Enfield property would come up in parish maps all the time. For freehold, land, they also give you the details of the first land title. So when it's covered by old system, they'll often give you the date that the land was granted, so you can go back into the old system records. Or if it's tolerance title, they'll give you that first volume and folio number. Yay! If it's Crown land, they'll tell you the name of the person who occupied that land when the map was drawn, and they'll give you the tenure number. So was it a special lease or a conditional lease or a permissive occupation or a conditional purchase, whatever it was, Western Lands lease, that will show on the map, and that gives you the information that you need to then go searching for the records relating to that lease, that tenure transaction. And the other thing about the Crown land occupation, as the names of people who occupied that land changed or as the type of tenure changed, they'd update that information by hand on the maps until they release the next edition, and then they'd continue updating by hand as they needed to. So here we have a parish map. This is a country parish map for Parish of Wilkie, County Harden, Land District of Young, Eastern Division of New South Wales. So all that information is given to you in the centre of the map there. You've got the picture at the bottom of the land and how it was divided up and some names and numbers and things like that. And then over on the right-hand side there, you've got a very big table that gives you useful yet scary looking information. Not scary, very useful though. And we know this is 1934 because it tells us on the map. Now the first thing I've done is just blown up some of the map, and then what we can see here are two blocks of land with the name Henry King on them. We can see that they're portion number 280, portion number 282. That's important because that tells us where that land is in that parish. So portion 280, Parish Wilkie, County Harden, Land District Young. That tells us everything we need to know about where that land was. We know that 282 was 311 acres. We know that portion 280 was 286 acres. We also have some numbers with H's on them. So we've got H2331 and H2420, and those numbers are the first half of the Crown Plan numbers. They're important as well because that will get us, if we knew the second half, it would get us to the Crown Plan, the portion plan for each of those blocks. And we can also see there's a nice little diagram of where the village of Kingsvale was, and it says, see the diagram. If you look on the bottom right-hand corner there, you'll see the diagram of the village. The next bit that I've just blown up there is from the big scary table on the right-hand side, and you can see it's just divided into columns. So you've got the portion number, the parish number, you've got a catalogue number, that's your Crown Plan, your portion plan number. Then we've got the volume and folio number for each of those blocks where they've been transferred into Torrens title. So for 280 and 282, we've got again the same Crown Plan numbers, 2420, 2331, and we've also got the Torrens title register numbers there. So a lot of information is given to us just from this map. So not scary, but very useful. This is an earlier copy of a parish map of the Parish of Wilkie, County Harden. So same map, just an earlier one. And you can see we've still got Henry King owning those two properties or on those two properties, but there's more information, some of which has been crossed out. So we can see there for portion 280, we've got CP 75.225, March 25th. So that tells us at the time that this map was drawn, this land was held as a conditional purchase, so it's not freehold at that stage. It's a conditional purchase taken out in 75. It's the 225th conditional purchase taken out for that year, and the date it was taken out was March the 25th. Now, the fact that the line's through that there would tell me that at some stage Henry King has managed to pay that off and now owns that land freehold, but back at the time that the map was drawn, he didn't. And the same with the plan above, the block above, that's CP 75224. So with that information, the CP number, conditional purchase, I can then go and trace conditional purchase records to find out what the details of that transaction were, and maybe glean some information about the house and the property and the things, the improvements that were on those blocks of land. We're just going to think about Crown plans very quickly. So Crown plans are like portion plans. They show land boundaries, physical features of specific blocks of land. Physical features, they might give you the neighbours' names, references to government gazettes, Lands Department correspondence numbers and things like that. They might refer you back to earlier tenures and earlier ownership. They go back to 1792, so they're quite old. And there's still about 40% of the Crown plans that were created that are still current. The rest of them have now been replaced by deposited plans. So if you own land yourself, you probably know that your land is part of a DP and a lot number or a strata plan. But these are the basis of all of those later plans. So as I said before, you can look at these on the HLRV in the reading room only. Can't do this from home, only in our reading room, but you can't buy copies or get copies from us. You have to get the copies from the LRS or the land brokers the information brokers from the LRS website. Beg your pardon, the phone's ringing. And then you can find the Crown plan number on the parish map. So this is an example of a Crown plan. This one was not actually taken from the LRS website. This was taken from a correspondence file. It's just to show you what a Crown plan would look like. And you can see there it's just of a particular block. It tells us the size. It gives us some of the topographical features, and the actual Crown plans would also be annotated with some of that information that I just looked at in the previous slide. So moving on to Lands Department records, we can think about sources such as sketchbooks and field books. So these were created by surveyors when they were out measuring up land in the New South Wales countryside. They'd send sketches back to the Surveyor General in Sydney of what they'd been working on, and field books would be where they wrote their notes down for every single block and things that they were measuring up. We've got records about the occupation or the tenure of Crown land and the alienation of Crown land. So alienation is when land is sold from the government to a private individual, so freehold. And tenure is more about where someone is holding that land from the government. So they might be holding it as a depasturing licence or a conditional purchase or a special lease number, Western Lands lease, etc. You see these numbers on the parish map. And alienation, as I said, is to do with the grant or sale or auction of land, often recorded on the parish map, but then the land becomes freehold. So once the land is freehold, then you start to think about the land titling records and some of those things that we've looked at today. This is just a quick example of a sketchbook. So this is in the township of Young. This is where a surveyor's gone and sketched a block of land and looked at what the footprints of the various buildings on that block of land were. And that's just a little blow up there. So you can see we've got the garden, the dwelling house, the chemist shop, the printing office in front. So it's very nice if you can manage to find one of those for the property that you're searching. The next record that you can see here is the conditional purchase register for Henry King, who was the man from the parish map that we looked at. We've got the two conditional purchases there, one after the other, and then going across the page, it just gives us details about letters that were received by the Lands Department on this conditional purchase block. It tells us any transfers, so he's mortgaged that property out to the bank and then taken it back again. And then you can also see down the bottom there, we've got deed prepared 30/12/1902 and to the Registrar General 31/1903. That would mean that this is when the land has become freehold. So with a conditional purchase, you could take that land up before it was surveyed, but you'd have to organise to get it surveyed. You had to improve the block over time, so with fences and buildings and those sorts of things. You had to pay the government back the money that it was worth, and then once you'd met those three conditions, once you'd paid it off, then that land would become yours as a freehold property. So that's how Henry King got his land. And then this is some correspondence that we found in the archives collection about that conditional purchase transaction. The typed page on the right-hand side there is requesting that because he's met all those conditions, that the land should be now is now freehold, so could he please have his deed of grant for those two properties? And then the one on the left-hand side is just describing where those lands were in the number terminology that was used by the Lands Department at the time. This is other letters that were in that bundle of correspondence, and here you can see that there's a description from 1875 that tells us about what was on that land at the time. So he's already put a stone house on there with 7 rooms, glazed sash windows, boarded floors, an iron roof, panel doors and a veranda. So 1875, we know there's already a house standing on there. And on the right-hand side, there's a description of some of the other improvements, including the sheep yard and those sorts of things, and how much they were worth. And then, just because I couldn't resist, I just had to go back and have a look at his deceased estate file, which tells us about the property, it tells us about the improvements, it tells us about the fencing and what buildings were on the property at the time of his death in 1909. On the right-hand side there, we've got a list of all of his freehold property, including all his volume and folio numbers, which I could then go back to look at on the HLRV. And the next page, just to show you again some of that furniture, so quite a bit of furniture in his property, the values of each thing. And then on the right-hand side, I've just popped in also the list of his livestock, so all his sheeps and his bulls and the horses and all of those things. So there was also a valuation of what was in the blacksmith's shed and the other buildings that were there. So it would give you quite a picture of what a property in Young in the early 1900s would need to operate and how much all of that property was worth. So just quickly, some other records in the collection. So you might look in collection search for the names of the owners if you knew who they were, and that might tell you something about their property. Might not, but it might. You might look for the address, you might look for the street name. If it's a tiny little country town or a small area, you might look for a place name as well. I wouldn't look for Sydney, there'd just be too much that would come back. Just thinking about some of the public buildings and property records, there's school properties, railway properties, and even some photographs that are quite nice as well. With government property, we've got things like the Government Architects Guide that goes through and lists records of buildings built by the government architects, so police stations, courthouses, school residences, lockups, those sorts of things, some of which have since been sold off and people live in those now. We've got plans of public buildings, so including staff residences. There's also correspondence about the building of the public buildings and other sorts of property records from different government departments about properties that the different departments owned over time. This is just a nice little drawing of a plan, I suppose, really, of the public school and the teachers' residence at Lindburn. So it's a tiny little house with a tiny little school on it. Beautiful drawing back in 1882. When we go to the school file, we've also got the document where they've requested the tenure to build that school building. And there is quite a bit of correspondence about that school building in the school file, and you can kind of track its deterioration from the 1880s. In the early 1900s, there was a series of letters about the condition of the house and the vermin and the bugs on the walls and who was going to clean it and who didn't clean it well, and was it the teacher's fault and was it the cleaner's fault, and all of this back and forth. So quite interesting. And then by the 1930s, they'd leased the property out to a man and his wife who were requesting that the rent be reduced because he wasn't getting a lot of income. He was earning what he could, prospecting for gold. And so that kind of feeds into the Great Depression and things from the time. So it's kind of like a nice little, well, not very nice for the building, but, you know, it's an interesting look at how that property progressed over time. And finally, we've got some photographs of houses as well and property in the State Archives collection. So we've digitised a lot, and you can search for these in Collection Search. I'd be thinking more about government buildings that were built for purposes like teachers' residences and those sorts of things. But you could put in terms like residence, house, hut or cottage. And some of the groups of photos that we've got are things like the government architect photographs of public buildings, Department of Education school photographs, the railways collected photographs as well for mainly train pictures. The government printing office took a lot of photographs over time. And then the Daceyville garden suburb, when that was built, they took photographs of the houses furnished and the outsides of the houses as part of that model suburb that they built there. And just to end up, we've got this lovely photograph of the East Maitland Land Office cottage, the caretaker's cottage there. We've got the photograph of the Glen Davis Public School Director's Cottage in Anderson Square. No date for that one. And our very, very last slide for today is the photograph of the Dacey Garden suburb. And we've got the outside of a semi-detached cottage and the inside of a cottage. So again, quite interesting to see how they felt that that should be furnished back in 1918. So that is the end of the webinar today. I would like to thank you all for coming.